Good afternoon, scholars. So great to see you back here today. This afternoon, we're going to be diving into chapter 7 in the Rogers book, looking at innovativeness and the adopter categories. I hope that you found those categories to be pretty interesting. I know I sure did. I thought it was pretty fun to figure out which category I belong to, and we're going to take a look at that a little bit later in this presentation and see which categories we belong to as adopters of innovation. To get us started today, we're going to look a little bit deeper at what innovativeness means. We'll dive real deep into those different 5 categories of the adopters, looking at their characteristics, their behaviors. We'll take a look at the role that communication plays and how an innovation diffuses among the adopters. And then we will wrap up with a case study. So today, I hope that you will be able to identify and categorize those 5 adopter categories, understanding their characteristics, their motivations, and their behaviors. I hope that you will develop an understanding of how communication channels play a role in how things diffuse, how they interact with those adopter categories in communities, in societies, in organizations. We're going to analyze a real world case study and understand how each category of adopter impacts the diffusion of innovations. And then lastly, I hope that you will be able to evaluate and understand the implications of those adopter categories for organizations and how they develop their marketing, how they develop adoption campaigns so that we can get people to maximize adoption rates and accelerate diffusion of innovations. So let's start off by first understanding just what is innovativeness. In our text, Rogers says that innovativeness is the degree to which an individual is relatively earlier in adopting new ideas than others in that system. So these are going to look like what we'll learn to be as like our early adopters, those that come real early in the process, the innovators who take to technology and innovations. This is something that's really well known and studied about in the concept of diffusion. Actually, we know more about this than anything else in the process of diffusion. And when we talk about innovativeness, we're talking about behavioral changes. If you remember reading the adopter categories, this was about how innovations affect their behaviors, right? So these are overt behavioral changes, things that we can see occurring to individuals as they adopt innovations. So keep this in mind as we are going through and learning about those adopter categories today. We're talking about how fast and how quick they are in adopting an innovation and the behavioral changes that go along with that. So when we're looking at the adoption of behaviors, remember that we took that S-shaped curve, that diffusion curve was an S-shaped curve. This really gained traction in the 1960s, and that's when we started to standardize these categories of adopters that we're going to get into. We had a lot of different words for those names of different categories of adopters prior to this. We called them progressivist if they were real innovative, experimentals, advanced scouts. So we had some kind of different names for them. It was all over the place. Nothing was really standardized. Those that were slow to adopt, those were the least innovative. We called them drones or parochials or diehards that were slow and resistant to change. So over time, these categories of adopters' names have really solidified, and now we have a standardized way of categorizing them. But I want you to take a look at this S-curve of adoption on the screen right now. What we're looking at here is really that time element that is a part of this. Yes, we're looking at the number or the percentage of adopters that are taking to an innovation, but the time piece going across that x-axis at the bottom is really the element of the diffusion process that allows us to classify the adopters and really gives us that S-shaped diffusion curve. The adoption of an innovation typically follows a normal bell-shaped curve. And so you will kind of see that this is that beginning of that bell-shaped curve. When we plot the cumulative number of adopters, the result is this S-shaped curve. It starts off pretty slow, at first, and then it takes off a little bit faster when we reach kind of a maximum number of adopters in a system. And then again, it slowly tapers off at the end as fewer and fewer people are adopting an innovation. So real slow, quick to rise, starts to taper off a little bit more slowly there at the top. Remember this S-shaped curve of adoption as we start digging into these categories of adopters. So you will kind of see here, there's that normal bell-shaped curve and how the different categories of adopters fit into what each one of these. We classify them on the basis of when they first begin using a new idea, or when they first begin using a new innovation, a new concept, a new technology. These are classifications of people, of individuals based on their innovativeness. Remember, we said that at the beginning of this presentation. We're looking at how soon, how early on someone takes to an innovation, how early they are adopting it. And each one of these categories contains people or individuals who have a similar degree of innovativeness. It's really a means of convenience of describing individuals. Remember, I said there were categories that were all over the place until about the 1960s, and then we really standardized the terms that we use now. So in the very beginning there, you see that first 2.5%, just a real small percentage of people are innovators. They are those very early on to adopt to a new technology, to a new innovation. Then we get the next 13.5%. Those are our early adopters, right? A little bit later on, they're coming in, they're taking to that new innovation. Then we really reach the bulk of our categories of adopters with our early majority at 34% and our late majority at 34%. And then we have those people at the end that are a little bit more traditional. They take to things a little bit more slowly. They need to see things happen over time. Those we call our laggards, and those are our last 15% of our adopters. So our innovators, real early on, quick to take to a new innovation, followed by the early adopters. Then the majority of our people either fall into the early majority or the late majority, and then those at the very end are laggards. And we're going to get into each one of these categories and understand them a little bit more. So let's look at those innovators. A word that we use to describe innovators really is kind of venturesome, right? They are quick to go out and try something. They tend to be more cosmopolitan. So instead of being more rural, these are more city folks. They are friends with other innovators. And I think this is going to play a key role when we start talking about communication channels later on. These people have financial resources, so they can go out when the technology is new and it's expensive, and they are not afraid to spend their money to get their hands on that innovation. They are willing to accept occasional setbacks with this innovation that they have. And these people play a really, really critical role in the diffusion process because they help launch new ideas into the system, but they can also serve as gatekeepers in the flow of those new ideas, right? So they're either going to help push out that innovation, or they can gatekeep and they can block it from being spread further. Remember this, that they are friends with other innovators and the communication channels that take place. This is how they are either helping launch new ideas or how they can serve as gatekeepers. Do you know any innovators? Are you an innovator? Are you quick to take to the new innovation? Are you one of the first ones to go out and get your hands on the newest version of the phone or the newest technology that's out there? Are you quick to use the newest AI? How fast are you at adopting some of the newest innovation that's out there? Maybe you are an innovator. Remember, followed by that, we have our next category of early adopters. The word that really kind of sums up these early adopters is that they are respected by their peers. They tend to be a little bit more local, but they have a very high degree of opinion leadership. So you're checking in with these people, you're asking them for advice, you want to know from them if this is the technology that you should go with, should you use this innovation. They really help trigger the critical mass to adopt an innovation. They put their stamp of approval on these things. So again, local, high degree of opinion leadership. You want to go to them, you want to check in with them to know if this new innovation is the right thing that you should get. You're looking for them to put their stamp of approval on it. So do you fit this category? Are you someone who maybe doesn't go and get that new innovation just immediately? You wait just a little bit, but are people coming to you for your advice and your opinion on if they should go and get this new innovation? Maybe you're an early adopter. Or maybe you're the next 34% on that bell curve. Maybe you are in the early majority. These folks are really deliberative, right? They are going to make a decision. They want to, first of all, adopt before the average number of people in the system, right? They're still on that left side of the curve, but they're kind of the bulk of the people fall into either the early or the late majority here. They're interacting a lot with their peers. They don't really hold opinion leadership positions though, right? They're not the super early folks. They're not the innovators either. So they're not really, people are not really going to them for advice on this. But they have a lot of interpersonal networks and they provide interconnectedness in these interpersonal networks. Again, they're deliberative. They may sit on it. They may deliberate about this before they adopt it. And they are followers. You'll very seldom see them leading the charge on adopting a new innovation or a new technology. So are you in the early majority? Are you in that 34% of individuals who sit on it, who make a decision, who want to weigh all your pros and cons out before you decide to adopt something? Where are you? Maybe you come in the next category, the late majority. Do you find yourself being skeptical of the new innovations that are out there? Are you adopting after the average members in a society? Remember, this is another 34%, but this is to the right. So these are a little bit later. These people that fall in the late majority, they may be adopting for economic reasons, but they may also have a little peer pressure to adopt at this point. They're very cautious, they're very skeptical. The system norms of the system that they live in have to favor the innovation before they adopt. So they're not just going to rush out and adopt this new technology or this new innovation. Everything that goes on in the system around them kind of needs to tell them that it's okay to do this. They really don't have a whole lot of resources either. So they're financially prudent when they're making their decisions with their scarcer resources than the innovators and the early adopters. And you really have to remove that uncertainty for them before they can adopt a product. They have to know about it. They have to really be sold on this idea and bought into the idea of the innovation before they're going to adopt it, again, because they're very skeptical and they approach things with caution. So does this sound like you? Are you in the late majority? Lastly, we have that last little category, that last 15%, the laggards. These people are really traditional. They have almost no opinion leadership. So if you're the last one to adopt the newest innovation or the newest technology, if you're still holding out with a flip phone, I don't think anybody's coming to you to ask you about the newest iPhone that's on the market, right? We saw that some of our adopters were more cosmopolitan, some of them were more local. These people are very much isolated, right? Like they don't really stay up to date on what's new, what's happening with technology and innovation. Their point of reference is in the past. And they are interacting with others who are really kind of having these same traditional values, who are also having points of reference that are in the past, that are not up and up on what's going on. We may see them as being suspicious of the innovation and suspicious of those change agents that come along trying to get them to adopt. They're pretty resistant to innovations. How many of you have parents or grandparents out there who you think may fit into this laggard category? That's definitely what I thought of when I read this. They may have limited resources, and that may hinder them also from being quick to adopt. But they really, really, really want to be certain about a new idea, and they want to make sure that it's not going to fail before they adopt it. So again, traditional, suspicious, resistant, really want to be certain that this is the right thing to do before they're going to invest their limited resources into an innovation. So if we're looking at some of these early adopters, so if we're looking at those innovators and the early adopters and maybe even some of the early majority and comparing those to those later adopters that come along, the late majority and the laggards, early adopters have a lot of different characteristics that stand out. So if you're an early adopter, you're probably going to have more years of formal education. If you have more education, probably are going to know a little bit more, think critically, maybe know more about innovation and technology. Maybe that makes you quicker to adopt. Early adopters also are more likely to have a higher social status, have a higher degree of upward social mobility, more intelligence, a more favorable attitude to change, and they're able to cope with uncertainty. And if you think about these innovations that come out early on and they're willing to adopt them early on, they do have to be willing to take on some sort of risk and some sort of uncertainty, right, with these new innovations. So the better ability to cope with uncertainty is definitely a needed characteristic. So we talked a lot about how the role of communication is important in diffusing an innovation, right? We need to have those change agents. We need to have opinion leadership. We need to have people with connected interpersonal networks to help spread this innovation through a system. So if we're looking again at early adopters compared to later adopters, specifically in the role of communication, early adopters have more social participation. So they're going to be out there talking to their friends, really connected interpersonally, sharing more about these innovations and helping diffuse these innovations. They have more contact with change agents. They may be change agents, right? They have a greater exposure to mass media channels. So they're able to learn more early on about new innovations and technologies. They see when the newest innovation is coming out. They know early on that there is a new technology available to them, and they then talk to their friends about it and they help spread this information. They are able to seek out information. They know how to do their research, therefore they have a greater knowledge of the innovations, and they also have a higher degree of opinion leadership. So again, people are coming to them asking for their opinions on things, which then helps spread, diffuse that innovation throughout those systems. If you are an organization, it is important to know how do you reach these different categories of adopters, right? And you really need to understand the role that communication plays in trying to diffuse your innovation through a system. So you want to understand that audience segmentation is something that you want to be doing to intentionally reach all those different categories of adopters through various communication channels, right? So whereas early adopters are easily reached through mass media, those late adopters and those laggards are not going to be reached through mass media as easily. When we're talking about audience segmentation, we're really talking about how do we take a really heterophilous group of people. Remember, heterophilous means not alike, and we want to break it down into more homophilous groups. So groups that are more similar. We want to take those various groups of people and get them down and distilled into groups of people that are alike, so that we can use our communication channels to get the right messages to the right people at the right time to diffuse our innovations. If you have more adopters of an innovation in your network, you are more likely to adopt the innovation yourself, right? So if you are surrounded by people who are adopting, if you are in this homophilous group, if you're surrounded by early adopters, you are more likely to be an early adopter yourself. So think about this as you are an organization or an industry that is trying to diffuse some sort of innovation to groups of others. How do we break those groups down into similar groups so that we can get the right message to the right people in the right fashion? So next, we're going to take a look at a short little video that kind of sums up everything in this chapter nicely. You have a handout that you're going to use, I think, to kind of assess your learning at the end of this video. And then we are going to dive into, from there, the case study. Oop. Excuse me, here we go.
Have you ever noticed that some people adopt new products or behaviors sooner than others? In 1962, Everett Rogers, a professor of rural psychology, developed a theory called the diffusion of innovations to explain this phenomenon. Rogers found that individuals within any society fall into one of 5 different adopter groups based on how early or how quickly they adopt an innovation. Rogers' theory tells us that if you want to promote the widespread adoption of a new behavior like these, you need to market to each adopter group differently, using distinct communication channels and messages. Let's look at each group to find out more. The innovators are a small but important group because they are always the first to learn about and adopt an innovation. They are risk-taking, adventurous, and like being on the cutting edge. The innovators are responsible for introducing innovations to the larger population because they share their experiences with their friends and communities. The early adopters are also a small, forward-thinking group and are often highly respected as opinion leaders. Their endorsement of an innovation plays a key role in what we call crossing the chasm, which is when the adoption of an innovation bridges the gap between the trendsetters and the majority. About 2/3 of people in a population fall into either the early or late majority groups. The early majority take time to make decisions. They will observe others' experiences and will only adopt the product once they are convinced it has real benefits and that it is the new status quo. The late majority are more resistant to change, but they are very responsive to peer pressure. They want innovations to be very well tested and widely used before they will risk trying it. Finally, the last group to adopt a new product or innovation is called the laggards. Laggards are highly resistant to change, and they also can be hard to reach with marketing campaigns because they often have very minimal exposure to media. Laggards wait until an innovation is completely mainstream before they adopt it, and in some cases, they never do. Think of some global innovations in recent years. Social media, for example, spread very fast and many people adopted it within a few years. Other innovations, such as the use of solar power, spread much more slowly and may take decades to reach widespread adoption. So the next time you're promoting a new product or behavior, consider the theory of diffusions of innovations and tailor your communication channels and messages. This will improve your chance of catalyzing widespread adoption.
All right. So I do want to point out one thing in this video, and you can see it right now with a little arrow pointing at that chasm, right? So a lot of researchers talked about this chasm that there was in between those early on adopters, those innovators, and the early adopters, and then the early majority. Our text actually says that there was plenty of research that suggests that there was actually no chasm at all, right? So I don't know if you picked up on that this week in the reading, that there was contradiction between a lot of the different research that's out there that talks about this chasm versus what our text actually says. So let's hop into that case study that you read this week. We read a case study about the Apple iPad, and I just want to sum up kind of real quickly what that case study was about, right? So we know Apple, I think, has long been this symbol of innovation, dating all the way back to 1985 when the first Mac came out, right? Uh, they've always been kind of cutting edge with their technology, and the entire Apple brand really is a symbol of innovation. So when the iPad was introduced in January of 2010, it was also on the cutting edge, right? In just 80 days, they sold 3 million units of the iPad. People didn't know what this was. Uh, Actually, a lot of people were kind of misunderstanding the product and calling it the big iPhone. I don't know if you were around at this time and remember when the iPad came out, but it was like, what is this thing? This is just an iPhone, only larger. People really didn't understand at the time what it was capable of doing. Um, but even though it was kind of this new innovation, new technology, it still had these peak sales. That 2014 Christmas season where 26 million iPads were sold, and this brand new market was created with this product that was relatively still kind of new and somewhat misunderstood. If you think back to even, well, now, almost everybody, it seems like, has an Apple product, right? And if you have the newest AirPods that come out, you always want to get the newest version of the iPhone that's out, right? There is a little bit of status that is associated with owning Apple products and having the newest MacBook or the MacBook Air, right? So for a long time, Apple has been a symbol of status. And Apple's CEO, Steve Jobs, really knew this. He knew this about his product. And so when the iPad came out, he tapped into celebrities like Oprah, for example, to appear in his commercials. And it would make the iPad look, first of all, less risky, right? Because if Oprah's using it, well, it's got to be good. But then it also helped diffuse that innovation because he had celebrities like Oprah who were spreading their opinion about this new innovation to the masses through mass media. So he played on status and opinion leadership and what we just learned about the role of communication, mass media, to have commercials and other advertisements of his iPad endorsed by celebrities where other people were like, yes, that's something I want. I want this new innovation. I want to get an iPad, which definitely helped that 2014 Christmas season reach those 26 million units sold, right? But it's also maintained Apple as a status symbol, uh, as us wanting to get the newest version of whatever Apple creates, whatever comes out. So I think this was a really neat case study that we read that just showed about how we had a new innovation that was out and we used different ways of diffusing this product. Even though it was a misunderstood product, there were still ways of getting the product out there to the masses. And now I think if we're following that kind of S-shaped curve, it started off slow, it really peaked, and now the iPad's starting to taper off. People are not using it maybe quite as much as they once did. And I think this was even mentioned in the article, right, in our case study. So what once was the end thing to have, the iPad is starting to slowly taper off as far as being a new innovation. So I know I talked about throughout this presentation, do any of these categories resonate with you? There's a quiz for everything on the internet, right? So I wanted just to share with you quickly, and you can go to this website on your own at the end of this presentation. But what kind of adopter are you? What category do you fit into? There's a fun little website that you can go to. You can take the quiz. What kind of adopter are you? I found out that I'm in the late majority. I thought I was a little bit more up and up than that on the cutting edge. I guess I'm not. I think I do kind of wait around for people to use a product and for me to have some opinion leadership from others to tell me to invest in something. I kind of sit around and deliberate before I'm going to make a decision and invest my resources. But yes, these slides will be available to you. Click on the link, go figure out what type of adopter you are and what category you fit into. Here's our references from this week. Thank y'all so much, scholars. It has been a pleasure being with you. Have any questions? Reach out to me. Thanks for being here.